Welcome back to the deep dive. If you've ever wondered what separates, a brilliant college student from a genuinely wise, mature adult who can actually navigate all the real-world paradoxes, then this is definitely the deep dive for you.
It is. We spend so much time analyzing the cognitive leaps that happen in childhood and adolescence.
Right, all the Piaget stages.
Exactly. But the argument in our source material today is that the most important intellectual growth, the really transformative stuff, happens after we finish formal schooling.
That's when complexity really hits you.
It's when it all gets messy.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to explore cognitive development in what researchers call emerging adulthood.
So that's roughly the late teens through the 20s.
And often into their 30s, yeah. We want to understand the profound shifts that happen once people encounter real ambiguity, moral dilemmas, and the difficult reality of institutions like higher education. We're really analyzing that transition to mature thinking.
Okay, so let's unpack that journey. When researchers tackle this huge task of studying how our adult brains handle data and crises and all those contradictions, they generally use three classic approaches. It feels important to, understand the lens they're using before we jump in.
It's absolutely crucial because these three frameworks, they each give us a different piece of the puzzle. They're not in competition.
Okay, so what's the first one?
First, you have the stage approach. This is the one most people are probably familiar with. It's linked to Piaget. It focuses on these big qualitative changes.
So not just getting better at something, but thinking in a whole new way.
Precisely. It describes shifts in the nature of thought itself. It's looking for those huge structural metamorphoses in how we process the world. Are you thinking about possibilities, or are you stuck on certainties? Are you rigid, or have you become flexible?
So if a teenager masters abstract concepts like algebra, that's them hitting the formal operations stage.
Right.
And the stage approach is asking, what's the next fundamental step up from that? Not just better analysis, but a completely new way of framing reality.
Exactly. Now, completely separate from that is the psychometric approach. This one is purely quantitative.
So we're talking numbers, tests.
All numbers. It analyzes intelligence over time, longitudinally, using standardized tests. This is about tracking cognitive horsepower, IQ, memory functions, verbal ability, and crucially, processing speed.
And seeing how those numbers change over an adult's life.
Yes, it might tell you, for instance, how much faster you can solve a puzzle at 25 versus, say, at 65. It's about the metrics.
Okay, so one is structural, the other is metric-based, and the third approach.
The third is the information processing approach.
And that sounds like we're treating the brain kind of like a computer, like hardware.
We are, and it's a critical way to understand real-world performance. This approach focuses entirely on the mechanics of the system. How does the brain encode information? How does it store it? How does it retrieve it later?
It's less concerned with the stage you're in or your score on an IQ test.
Right. It's more concerned with the sheer efficiency of your internal operating system.
Can you give us an example of what that efficiency looks like in, say, an emerging adult?
Certainly. As young adults mature, their processing system becomes remarkably efficient at things like resistance to interference.
So just ignoring the noise and focusing on the signal.
Exactly. Their attention span management also improves drastically, especially when they're faced with complex long-term tasks. It's like the system learns how to run more high-priority applications at the same time without crashing the whole thing.
So taken together, these three approaches give us a full picture.
A holistic 360-degree view. You get the structure of thought, the raw power metrics, and the efficiency of the whole processing system.
That cognitive restructuring in our 20s, it leads us directly to this really fascinating concept that researchers have termed postformal thought. We know that adolescent thinking is defined by formal operations, pure logic, abstract ideas, idealized solutions.
But real life doesn't follow perfect logic.
Not at all. So what is this proposed fifth stage, and why is it even necessary?
Well, postformal thought is necessary because the world is inherently contradictory. It is characterized by the continued use of formal analysis, that logic doesn't go away, but now that analysis is applied in a much more context-driven way.
So it's an extension of adolescent thinking, but it moves beyond that rigidity.
Yes, it becomes more practical, flexible, and creative.
Okay, so give me an example. A person using formal operations sees a real-world problem and says what?
They'd say, based on pure logic, X must be the solution. It's very clean, very black and white.
But a person using postformal thought would say something different.
They'd say, logically, yes, X is the solution, but X ignores the cultural context, the emotional cost, and the budget constraints. So we actually need solution Y, which is, messier, but it's functional.
That's a perfect distinction. The key shift is realizing that pure logic often has to give way to context and to human experience.
And as that happens, the person engaging in postformal thought becomes significantly less impulsive and less purely reactive. They don't just jump to the easiest emotional answer or the most rigid intellectual one.
They become more practical, but also more imaginative. They get that solutions often involve compromise and dealing with paradox.
Exactly. That move from black and white to a million shades of gray must feel, well, exhausting at first, but ultimately it's really empowering.
And the source material highlights one particular characteristic that's absolutely vital for managing all that messiness: cognitive flexibility.
Cognitive flexibility is the genuine hallmark of postformal cognition. It really is. It's that mental agility you need to handle unforeseen events, the ability to pivot quickly when your plan A, B, and even C all fail.
And it's more common in emerging adults.
Much more common because they are constantly being forced to recalibrate their expectations as they enter the adult world. Life is throwing new things at them constantly.
I can see how crucial this is in the modern economy. I mean, our careers aren't these linear 40-year paths anymore. You have to constantly learn new skills, move, maybe change industries entirely.
Absolutely. Think about someone who plans their entire career around a single specialized industry, let's say print media, back in 2005.
Ooh, bad timing.
Right. So when that industry collapses, the individual who lacks cognitive flexibility, they often experience a severe professional crisis. They might retreat into pure emotion anger, denial, or into a pure rigid intellect, trying to force an old solution onto a new problem.
They're the person insisting on trying to be a print editor in a world that now only hires digital content strategists.
Exactly. And cognitive flexibility prevents that retreat. It allows the emerging adult to hold two conflicting pieces of information at the same time. My skills are valuable, and my industry no longer exists.
They don't have to choose one or the other.
They adapt, they synthesize, they transfer the core value of their skills to a new context.
And the sources are very clear that this flexibility isn't something you're just born with. It requires active work. It's not a superpower you just wake up with one day.
No, it requires proactive engagement. It involves actively listening to others, and this is key, especially those who disagree with you. And it involves deliberately considering diverse opinions.
Because if you just surround yourself with people who validate your existing worldview,
Your cognitive flexibility atrophies. It just withers. Mature thought requires genuine openness. It requires you to absorb the complexity of the opinions around you, even if, maybe especially if, they make your own task harder.
that ability to hold conflicting pieces of information, that brings us to what many philosophers and psychologists consider the most advanced cognitive process there is, dialectical thought. I just love this idea of synthesizing contradictions. It moves us past just being flexible. It moves us toward integration.
Dialectical thought really is the pinnacle. It is the ability to consider a strong central idea, a thesis, and then to consider its necessary counterargument, the antithesis.
And then what?
And then, through mature reflection, you arrive at a synthesis. You are looking at the exact same situation and simultaneously seeing the pros and the cons, the inherent conflict, the possibilities, and the limitations all at once.
It sounds like the intellectual equivalent of seeing in 3D, while most of us are kind of stuck in 2D. But the sources note this is incredibly rare in early life.
Oh, it is. This kind of dual vision requires immense experiential maturity. The sources note that dialectical thought is rare in adolescents and is much more often found in middle-aged people.
And why is that? Just life experience.
Pretty much. It's easy to believe in one absolute truth when you haven't lived long enough to watch your own absolutes crumble and contradict themselves over and over again. You need experience with life crises that force you to integrate ideas rather than just reject the ones you don't like.
Let's dedicate some time to really understanding the components of this three-part process, because it really feels like the engine of high-level maturity.
Okay, so the process starts with the thesis. That's just your foundational statement or your belief.
Give me an example.
Let's say your thesis is, hard work always guarantees success. That's your starting point. It's a clear, strong belief.
Okay, I've got my thesis.
Then the antithesis arises. This is the necessary opposition. External factors, luck, and systemic bias often undermine hard work. The critical part here is realizing that every idea, every truth, sort of bears within itself the opposite idea. Your initial belief contains its own limitations.
And the synthesis is what resolves this tension.
The synthesis creates a new, more comprehensive level of truth. It's so important to note that it doesn't choose thesis or antithesis. It integrates them.
So it's not a compromise, it's something new.
Exactly. The synthesis in our example might be, success requires both hard work and the strategic understanding of systems and luck, which makes effort a necessary but insufficient condition for achievement. This new synthesis is a higher order understanding that accounts for both the initial poles.
What's so fascinating here is that this isn't just some recent psychological concept. The sources show that this dialectical process is foundational to so many influential theories across psychology and philosophy.
The academic relevance is undeniable. I mean, take Vygotsky's approach to education. He talked about the zone of proximal development.
Right, what a student can do with guidance.
That zone is the tension. It's the conflict between what the learner already knows, their thesis, and what they can achieve with help, the antithesis. The instruction itself is the mechanism for the synthesis, for the new learning.
And even Piaget, who we mentioned earlier, he modeled change through this kind of contradiction.
Yes, absolutely. Piaget's cognitive dissonance, that discomfort you feel when new information contradicts what you already believe, that is the conflict that drives a child from one stage to the next. Cognitive development, at its core, is the mind wrestling with its own contradictions.
And if we look at lifespan researchers, they often observe that crises and conflicts are never just negative things. They always involve both risks and opportunities.
A cancer diagnosis, a job loss, a major relationship split, these are the crises. They're the antitheses that shatter the existing order of your life.
But if they're handled maturely.
If they're handled maturely, the individual doesn't just return to their old life. They forge a synthesized life, one that is more resilient, wiser, and more prepared for paradox. The crisis becomes the catalyst for growth.
Even the developmental model we're using right now, our net concept of emerging adulthood, seems like a perfect dialectic itself.
It is the ultimate tension point. Emerging adulthood is defined by this constant tension between the need for independence, identity, and exploration. That's the thesis, and the lingering realities of financial dependence, family expectations, and a lack of commitment, the antithesis.
And a successful navigation of that decade is creating your own personal synthesis.
Exactly. And of course, the granddaddy of psychosocial development, Erikson's framework, uses this process at every single stage of life.
From birth to old age.
Erikson structures our entire life around two opposing poles at each stage: trust versus mistrust, intimacy versus isolation, identity versus role confusion. Successful development isn't about eliminating one side, it's about integrating the two conflicting drives into a virtue that incorporates both, like hope or fidelity. It shows that human growth is fundamentally dialectical.
Now, this concept gets even richer when we bring culture into it. I mean, a lot of Western academic thinking prizes debate where we pit a thesis against an antithesis to declare a winner.
Right, it's adversarial.
But the sources introduce a fascinating cultural perspective, suggesting that some cultures are inherently structured to favor synthesis from the get-go.
This is pointing to some compelling research referenced by Nisbet and his colleagues, which suggests that people in many Asian cultures tend to think more holistically and seek synthesis as a default. They are, you could say, culturally primed to see the interconnectedness of things rather than isolating variables to find a single culprit.
So what does that holistic approach actually mean in practical decision-making terms compared to a more Western tendency?
It means that the holistic thinker is generally open to more possibilities and is less likely to conclude there's only one correct answer. So if a Western thinker approaches a problem, let's say a dispute between two neighbors, they might quickly analyze the rules, the rights, the legal precedents to assign blame and find a singular, rigid solution.
They isolate the facts of the conflict.
They do. They're focused on who wins.
Okay.
The holistic thinker, as referenced in the sources, is more likely to include the entire context in their thinking, the history of the neighborhood, the family dynamics, the social expectations, to find a resolution that respects the entire situation. They see the conflict not as a problem to be solved, but as a situation to be resolved.
So they're looking for a synthesized outcome, one that allows both sides to save face and continue to coexist.
Exactly. It's the difference between sharp analytical focus and broad integrative inclusion, and it's a powerful lesson in advanced cognition.
Okay, we've spent a good amount of time on the internal ideal, this flexible, synthesizing, mature mind. But it's time to confront the external pressures that actively derail this whole sophisticated thought process. We need a strong bridge from the ideal mind to, well, to harsh reality.
And if mature thought requires cognitive flexibility and the full bandwidth for synthesis, then the biggest roadblock isn't some internal failure. It's the external social reality that imposes a massive invisible tax on the mind. We are talking about stereotype threat.
Okay, so stereotype threat is defined as the possibility that your appearance or your behavior will be misread to confirm another person's prejudiced attitudes. It's devastating because, as the sources note, it's often self-imposed.
That's the insidious part. You internalize the knowledge of negative stereotypes that are associated with your group, whether that's gender prejudice, ethnic prejudice, or even ageism.
And the mere possibility of being stereotyped, even if no explicit discrimination actually occurs, that's enough to trigger the cognitive disruption.
That's all it takes. Let's look at the mechanism here, because it's really important to understand this mechanically.
Okay, we talked earlier about the brain as a supercomputer with the information processing approach. So how does stereotype threat hijack the operating system?
Well, the moment that possibility of being stereotyped arises, it generates this extreme internal anxiety. And that anxiety becomes like a background process running at high CPU usage.
So it's eating up your resources.
All of them. Instead of allocating, say, 90% of your working memory, your brain's temporary RAM, to solving the complex problem on the test in front of you, suddenly 30% of that capacity is instantly diverted to managing anxiety. You're thinking, am I confirming the stereotype? Am I breathing too loudly? Does my posture look confident enough?
So the primary task, the thing you're actually supposed to be doing, slows down or fails entirely because all the cognitive resources are being used for self-monitoring and emotional defense.
Precisely. This severe anxiety severely disrupts cognition. It means complex steps in formal analysis get skipped. Your ability to recall specific facts is hampered. On top of that, this intense internal stress distorts emotional regulation, which makes small setbacks feel catastrophic, increasing frustration, and ultimately, it significantly impairs achievement.
So the test score, the job interview performance, or the complex decision-making process suffers. And not because the individual lacks the capacity for postformal thought.
But because their processing power was stolen by an external social pressure.
And it becomes this insidious cycle, right? The underperformance then seems to confirm the very stereotype that caused the anxiety in the first place.
Which just reinforces the internalization for the next time. It's a vicious, self-fulfilling prophecy, and it provides a critical reminder for us. For the potential of post-formal dialectical thought to ever be realized, the social environment has to be conducive to utilizing full cognitive capacity, free from the mental tax of systemic bias.
That harsh reality transitions us neatly into the realm of ethics. I mean, emerging adulthood isn't just about developing smarter ways to think. It's about making real-world decisions that have moral weight. It's about the practical necessity of doing the right thing when independence finally hits. How do researchers even try to measure the deepening of this ethical framework?
Well, the standard measurement tool we look at in the source material is the Defining Issues Test, or DIT. It was developed by a researcher named James Rest. And it's highly effective because it moves beyond just simple behavioral observations and into the structure of moral reasoning itself.
Okay, how does it work?
The DIT presents test takers with specific moral dilemmas. The classic example is usually some modified version of the Heinz dilemma, where a person has to decide whether or not to steal medicine to save a life.
Okay.
The test taker then has to rank a series of possible solutions, or more importantly, reasons for an action. That ranking reveals why the individual makes their choice, which is what measures their ethical sophistication.
And what do the decades of DIT findings tell us about the trajectory of moral growth? Is there a clear pattern?
There is a reliable one. DIT scores tend to rise with age. Moral reasoning generally becomes less self-interested and more centered on universal principles of justice and fairness as people move past adolescence.
So we get less selfish.
In our reasoning, yes. And the sources also explicitly mention a non-testing method for driving this growth, which connects right back to what we were just talking about. The process of deepening ethical thought requires actively learning about perspectives that are not one's own.
So moral growth is actually an exercise in cognitive flexibility. You can't become more ethical if you can't or won't internalize the worldview of the person on the other side of the dilemma.
Precisely. Now, if the DIT measures the structural sophistication of our reasoning, another theory, Haight's moral foundations theory, gives us insight into the content and the clusters that motivate those choices across different cultures.
Okay.
Haight suggests there are these distinct, almost innate psychological foundations upon which all human morality is built.
Let's review those 5 core clusters because they really seem to explain so much about societal and political conflict.
They do. First, we have care for others. Harm no one. This is foundational, based on empathy and preventing suffering. Second, be fair, do not cheat. This is all about justice, proportionality, reciprocity, getting what you deserve.
Okay, those first two seem pretty universal.
Mhm.
Then we move into the clusters that often cause a bit more
A
friction.
lot more friction, yes. The third foundation is seek purity, avoid contamination. This is often associated with feelings of disgust, sanctity, and bodily or spiritual integrity. Fourth, respect authority. Do not break laws, which focuses on hierarchy, order, and social structure.
And the fifth.
The fifth, which hate often emphasizes, is loyalty betrayal, the idea of sticking with your in-group, your tribe.
The critical nuance here, as the sources emphasize, isn't that these foundations exist, they seem to be universal, but it's the prioritizing of them that causes all the trouble.
That's exactly it. The prioritizing of these clusters can differ significantly among people of different religious, political, or cultural backgrounds, and this is where the conflict emerges. For example, in political discourse, one group might overwhelmingly prioritize the Care Harm Foundation when they're crafting social policy.
Arguing that the government's main role is to alleviate suffering and provide a safety net.
Right. While another group might equally prioritize authority, purity, or fairness cheating.
So a different group might argue that the system has to prioritize fairness cheating, meaning people should only get what they earn, and any redistribution violates that core foundation.
Or, on cultural issues, they might prioritize purity, insisting that institutions or behaviors must remain uncontaminated by what they view as moral degradation. The sophistication of postformal thought lies not in choosing one foundation over the other, but in understanding that both priorities are legitimate expressions of human moral architecture.
That's a truly deep dive into how our cognition shapes our ethics. Now let's shift to the existential, using a framework that marries this cognitive structure with spiritual understanding. Fowler's 6 stages of faith. This sequence, built on Piaget and Kohlberg, details how our relationship with meaning and the divine evolves.
This progression is remarkable because it shows a trajectory from very literal, almost magical thinking to a complex, integrated acceptance of paradox. We begin with stage 1, intuitive projective, which is around ages 3 to 7. Here, faith is highly imaginative and emotionally driven.
So the image of God or the spiritual world is often projected from parent figures or maybe characters in storybooks.
Correct. Then we hit a more concrete stage. Stage 2, mythic literal. This is ages 7 to 11, where stories, religious texts, and rituals are viewed purely as literal, concrete truth. And the sources critically note that some adults remain at this stage for their entire lives.
Never moving past that literal interpretation.
Never. Then stage 3 is synthetic conventional, which is highly conformist. Faith is adopted uncritically. You rely on the beliefs and expectations of your community, your family, your tribe.
It's the faith of convenience, in a way. It serves your social identity. When does real independent thinking start to kick in?
That happens at stage 4, individual reflective. This stage is the breakthrough. The person begins to actively question, to reflect, and to take personal ownership of their beliefs. This often results in breaking away, at least intellectually, from the conformist group of stage 3.
They differentiate their own identity from their communal faith, a crucial step for emerging adulthood.
A huge step. But the real connection to our deep dive on postformal thought happens at the higher levels.
So how does the pinnacle of faith mirror the pinnacle of cognition?
This is where it gets highly integrated. Stage 5 is the conjunctive stage. This stage is explicitly noted in the sources as a postformal way of thinking. The individual is now able to integrate the contradictions and the paradoxes of life and faith. They see the truth in symbols, in metaphors, and even in different theological traditions.
So they recognize that absolute literal certainty might be impossible.
Yes. Someone at stage 5 can accept the fundamental truth behind both a literal interpretation and a metaphorical interpretation of a sacred text without feeling compelled to destroy one side.
They can hold both ideas at once.
They integrate the conflict between objective, scientific truth and subjective, spiritual meaning. They acknowledge the inherent limitations of language and culture in describing ultimate reality. And the sources note that because this level of complex synthesis requires extensive life experience and reflection, it is rarely achieved before middle age.
Just like dialectical thought.
Precisely.
Oh.
And finally, there's the highest stage, Stage 6 is universalizing. This is exceptionally rare. It's characterized by a profound sense of moral and spiritual transcendence, often caused by a transforming experience that leads to absolute selflessness and devotion to universal principles. The sources state this stage is rarely achieved, but it represents the ultimate synthesis of belief in action.
A complete integration of self, society, and all those existential paradoxes.
We must now take this analysis of cognitive potential and place it within the most concrete and widespread social institution for emerging adults: higher education. College is so often pitched as the mechanism for achieving these higher stages of thought.
Before we get into all the difficulties, the sources make a really compelling and, frankly, undeniable case for the long-term benefits of education. These benefits extend far beyond just career prospects.
They absolutely do. Education improves both health and wealth. People who graduate are statistically more likely to engage in preventative health care, they have lower rates of stress-related illness, and they live longer. And financially, longitudinal data suggests that investing in a college education returns the initial expense more than 5 times over a lifetime.
Wow, that's a substantial delta.
A huge one. And this speaks directly to the concept of massification, this idea that expanding access to higher learning benefits everyone, the masses, by creating a more educated, healthier, and prosperous society.
So the push for broad enrollment is based on these proven societal gains.
It is. And you see that in the statistics. We see high enrollment rates for 18 to 24-year-old high school graduates, which reflects that cultural belief that college is the required gateway to adult prosperity and cognitive development.
However, the sources very quickly present the paradox. The idealism hits reality in the form of incredibly high dropout rates and crushing student debt.
This is the crux of the crisis. In the United States, about half of those who enroll in college leave before graduating.
Half. That's a staggering number.
It is. And they incur significant costs, time, emotional energy, and a lot of financial resources without ever obtaining the degree that unlocks that 5-fold return on investment.
This sounds like a perfect illustration of the Matthew effect. The rich get richer, but the poor stay poor. How does that effect apply specifically to cognitive capital?
The Matthew effect creates a profound cognitive inequality. Those who successfully graduate don't just get wealth. They gain access to cognitively demanding jobs, roles that require constant synthesis, problem-solving, and managing complexity. Their daily environment continues to foster postformal thought.
They're forced to be dialectical thinkers every single day just to do their job.
Exactly. Conversely, the individual who drops out is left with debt and is often forced into jobs that are cognitively static, routine, and require much less complex, synthetic thought. This lack of cognitive challenge can actually stunt their development, potentially trapping them in lower stages of thinking. They pay the financial penalty and the cognitive penalty.
And the debt itself must make the situation almost impossible for those who drop out.
It's a massive burden. 2/3 of adults who attended some college have to pay back college loans. The interest often compounds rapidly, and the default rates are worryingly high, around 10% default. For those without the degree, this debt acts like a chain, severely limiting their ability to take risks, to invest, or to pursue the very flexibility needed for mature adulthood.
This brings us to a very thorny dilemma, the college for all mantra. Given these risks, is it truly better for everyone to attend college, or is it sometimes wiser to skip it entirely?
The material really forces us to confront this question. For many, college can become a frustrating, expensive, and ultimately detrimental experience if they don't graduate. The sources argue that in some ways it is better to avoid college entirely than to enroll and then leave.
Yeah.
That debt and lost time are that significant.
But the flip side is that by avoiding it, you're still limiting your long-term potential. It's a catch-22.
It really is.
Yeah.
The sources caution that choosing to avoid college may reduce later health, income, and cognition. So we are faced with a true dialectic. There's immense proven long-term benefit, the thesis, versus massive financial and academic risk, the antithesis. The synthesized challenge for emerging adults is finding a rigorous supportive path to obtaining those benefits.
And now, for what I found to be the most concerning finding in this whole section, we all just assume that college inherently makes people smarter, that it leads to postformal thought. But the research on actual cognitive advances during those first 2 years is surprisingly bleak.
It is a shocking finding that demands attention. Research suggests that over the first 2 years of college, almost half of college students made no cognitive advances.
None.
Their ability to think critically, to use formal analysis, or to show intellectual growth did not significantly improve. This suggests that simply being in college is not enough. The academic environment itself might be failing to foster maturity.
So why the stagnation? The sources point to multiple interconnected causes. Let's start with the academic environment itself.
The first cause cited is a change in college experiences, most notably less rigor in the coursework. If students are not consistently challenged with complex reading or synthesizing conflicting theories or engaging in projects that demand dialectical thinking, their capacity simply won't grow.
Less writing, more multiple choice tests, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Fewer opportunities for sustained, complex intellectual debate. That all contributes to cognitive atrophy.
And what about the shift to the corporate model? How does viewing students as customers undermine their cognitive growth?
When students are viewed as customers, the institution's priority subtly shifts from rigorous challenge to satisfaction and retention. Challenging students is inherently uncomfortable. It introduces cognitive dissonance, which, as Piaget noted, is necessary for growth. If a college prioritizes customer comfort and high satisfaction ratings over intellectual friction, it avoids the necessary catalyst for postformal thought.
That's profound. The system starts prioritizing ease over maturity.
And the third factor is that high emotional tax we discussed earlier. Unprecedented levels of stress. Emerging adults today face immense financial anxiety, identity pressures, global uncertainties. This high level of chronic stress consumes the mental bandwidth, that working memory, that should be dedicated to complex cognitive tasks. It makes it almost impossible to engage in the deep synthetic thinking required to advance.
But thankfully, the source material does offer some solutions and positive catalysts, particularly around the benefits of campus diversity.
Diversity is an absolute antidote to cognitive stagnation. The sources assert strongly that the increased diversity of the student body is more likely to encourage than discourage cognition.
How so?
If you are constantly exposed to individuals whose cultural, religious, ethnic, or political experience fundamentally challenges your own monolithic assumptions, you are forced into perspective-taking.
That interaction is the antithesis to your existing thesis. It forces a synthesis.
Exactly. And the demographics of incoming freshmen today are highly diverse. The sources note that in 2014, 20% were first-generation students, more than half female, high ethnic diversity, and visible LGBT communities. This demographic reality provides a rich, organic environment for dialectical thought to flourish. It forces students to listen and incorporate perspectives that differ vastly from their own upbringing.
And to capitalize on this diversity, the final positive shift is in teaching methodologies.
Yes. More faculty are moving away from the passive lecture format and toward learning methods that specifically require student interaction and foster learning. Think group projects, collaborative problem solving, Socratic seminars.
Active engagement.
These methods force students to articulate their thesis, confront the antithesis of a peer's argument, and collaboratively work toward a deeper, synthesized solution. This active engagement is the practical engine for developing the cognitive flexibility we've been discussing all along.
So the goal for higher education isn't just to enroll everyone, it's to create an environment where the challenges, both the diversity and the academic rigor, are strong enough to overcome that stagnation and truly facilitate the leap into postformal, flexible, and ethical thought.
That's the challenge.
This has been an absolutely comprehensive deep dive. We started with the abstract potential of the adult mind and landed firmly in the messy, high-stakes reality of emerging adulthood. Let's try to bring together our major findings. The adult mind isn't just smarter in the traditional sense. It is structurally different. It's postformal, which means logic has to yield to context, and it requires radical flexibility and the ability to handle contradiction, what we identified as dialectical thought.
And a core cognitive challenge throughout this whole period is achieving synthesis. This requires overcoming massive external barriers, like the cognitive toll exacted by stereotype threat, and achieving integration, whether that's integrating opposing moral foundations, like Haidt described, or reaching Fowler's highest postformal stages of faith that embrace paradox.
And we identified the central paradox of education. College offers these undeniable long-term benefits for health, for wealth, for cognitive potential, but simply enrolling, especially in environments that lack rigor and genuine student interaction, does not guarantee cognitive growth.
Right. The challenge for society is converting the access provided by massification into true, demanding intellectual development that fosters real maturity.
That integration of opposites, thesis, and antithesis is the ultimate marker of mature thinking. If we look at the political landscape, the sources touched on the sharp divisions between those who identify as liberals and those who identify as conservatives. And this divide often represents a prioritization conflict in those moral foundations we talked about.
Care versus purity, or fairness versus authority. It seems like an absolute unyielding opposition.
It does.
So if the ultimate goal of mature thought is achieving synthesis like Fowler's highly integrated conjunctive stage, or advanced dialectical thought, we have to ask ourselves this final provocative question. How might that political divide benefit from being treated not as an absolute opposition where one side must crush the other, but as a genuine crisis or conflict that presents both immense risks and unique opportunities for forging a larger, more comprehensive synthesis that integrates the underlying legitimate moral priorities of both sides?
So you're asking, can our highest cognitive capability be leveraged to solve our deepest social conflicts?
Think about that.